Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about which of these Inazuma Forgeable weapons is good and worth it to make. Because in my opinion, I think there's definitely a few clear winners out of this bunch. Now a quick disclaimer before we start, these are my thoughts and I'm sure that your thoughts on these weapons are definitely going to be different from mine. Depending on how long you've been playing this game, it's also going to depend on how many resources, prototype or billets, whatever you want to call them, you want to spend on these weapons. Some people might be like me and they just want to hold on to all of these billets because we're afraid. Billets are just rare as heck and I can understand why we'd want to be careful about spending them. It's basically like never using those max elixirs you get in RPGs even though you just beat the final boss. But anyway, yes, these are just going to be my own thoughts. I'm going to provide some math to kind of support my opinions, but for the most part, I might not get everything right. And so if there's something that you disagree on or have different thoughts about, then leave a comment down below and let me know. But let's jump right into it and start with the sword. The Amenoma Kageuchi. I think that the sword is definitely the best weapon to build if you had to build something here out of the bunch, and I'll explain why. It's a 454 base attack weapon, which is on the low side, but it gives you an extra 55.1% attack bonus. It has a really weird system to help you regenerate your energy called succession seeds, and the way that these work is that whenever you pop an elemental skill, you're going to get one of these succession seeds. Upon using your elemental burst, you consume them, and after 2 seconds, you will regenerate energy based on how many succession seeds that you have. The succession seeds also stack on one another, so when you gain a new succession seed, the duration of the previous succession seed refreshes. So this means that it's very easy to maintain and hold on to these seeds. The succession seeds will still stay even if you swap characters. At R1, you can get a max of 18 energy refunded back to you, which is 6 energy per seed with a max of 3 seeds, and at R5, you can refund a maximum of 36 energy. So in order to maximize the energy regeneration from this sword, we want skills with relatively low cooldown, or as long as you can use your elemental skill 3 times before your burst comes off of cooldown. So this means that you can still use it on characters with longer skill cooldowns, but you won't be maximizing the energy return, making it a little bit worse than if you were to use it on someone who can actually maximize the energy return. So let's go through all the characters that I think this is actually going to be good on. And I think that the top 3 characters that this is going to be really good on is Jin, Ayaka, and Kazuha. The runner-ups being Xingqiu, Kaya, and maybe Albedo and then Bennett. Jin has an 80 cost burst, so this energy refund is pretty nice for her, although she does have a passive that already refunds about 20 energy, but it's still pretty good to have max uptime on your elemental burst. Her E-skill is very low cooldown at 6 seconds, so you can definitely maximize the amount of succession seeds you get for this sword. At R1, we're basically refunding half of our energy after using a burst, so I think that's pretty powerful for a Jin. With Aika, it definitely helps out with a high energy cost burst, especially if you don't have enough energy regeneration for her, either from substats on your artifacts or from a second cryo team member not generating enough elemental particles for her. Her E-skill does have a long cooldown at 10 seconds, but you'll still get a decent amount of energy even if you just use 2 E-skills. Since her elemental burst is on a 20-second cooldown, if you are using it off of cooldown, that means you only use your E-skill twice. But if you do manage to use your E-skill 3 times, after you use your burst, you're going to be refunding 18 energy, which is almost a quarter of the energy needed to recast your burst. And since the majority of Ayaka's damage comes from her elemental burst, this is very powerful. And then for Kazuo, it's pretty much the same thing. It's strong because his E-skill is on a relatively low cooldown, either at 6 seconds or 9, depending on if you press or hold it, and his elemental burst is really nice to spam. It's a really good option, but I don't think it's the best. I personally like more elemental mastery, so my preference is to go the Iron Sting because I have enough energy regeneration on my Kazuha already. But if you do find that you're having problems generating enough energy for him, then this is a pretty decent option. Your alternatives being the Favonius sword or the sacrificial sword, but I like to use my sacrificial sword on my Xingqiu. And then speaking of Xingqiu, I said that it was okay on him, but obviously it's not great because his skills are on a very high cooldown, 21 seconds. Succession seeds last 30 seconds, so you can manage to stack these up, but at 21 seconds of cooldown, it takes almost a minute to get 3 stacks or 40 seconds to get 2. So however many seeds you can manage to get before your burst is actually charged is how much energy you'll regenerate. So for Xingqiu, your burst might actually get charged before you can even manage to get a 3rd seed. So actually proccing and regenerating energy with Xingqiu in this weapon is going to take a very long time, and it's not as effective if you were to use it with other characters, comparatively. But obviously, if you don't have the Sack Sword or a Favonius Sword, this is a great free-to-play option for him. But I do feel like most people might have one or the other at this point. But again, it completely depends on your account, so, decide for yourselves. And quickly for Albedo, I don't think it's that great for him. I think that Albedo already has a great weapon in the Harbinger of Dawn since he scales off of defense, and his elemental burst is already pretty low cooldown and energy cost at only 40. So I think you just have better options to put this weapon on instead of for Albedo. And then for Kaya, it's kind of meh because he already has energy recharge for his Ascension set, but if you do find that you aren't able to cast his elemental burst as often, then this can still work. And Kaya does easily get succession seeds because both of their skills are on 6-second cooldown, so he does maximize the benefits on this. Again, I just don't think it's as good because he already generates enough energy. With Bennett, it's a no for me because you're really aiming for high base attack. High base attack gives you the highest amount of attack bonus ratio that you give to your teammates while you use his elemental burst. 454 base attack is too low, so 454 on the base attack for this weapon just makes this a not good option for Bennett. But how is the actual damage comparison on the Amenoma Kageuchi? I did some calculations for Jean and Ayaka so that you guys can get a rough picture on how this weapon does compared to other weapons. Here is an ordered graph for Ayaka, and the orange bar is the Amenoma Kageuchi. You can see that it's pretty much in the middle of the pack. It outdamages its energy regeneration counterpart weapons, and its closest competitor is the flute. Its damage doesn't quite match up to the Blackcliff weapons or the Battle Pass weapon, the Black Sword, but it's the energy regeneration combined with its decent damage output that makes this weapon so good. Hopefully this visualization illustrates that point. And it's pretty much the same pattern for Jean as well. I actually removed the Favonius and the Sacrificial Sword because their damage output was actually that much lower. With a base attack of 454 and no extra attack percent, this would make a lot of sense. There are 2 flavors of charts here, whichever one you prefer to look at. The conclusion that you should come to is the same. The Amenoma Kageuchi falls about right in the middle, so it's a very decent damaging weapon that also provides energy regeneration. The next weapon that I think is really good out of this bunch is the Spear. The Kitain Cross Spear is a 565 base attack weapon that gives you 110 elemental mastery. It slightly increases the damage of your elemental skill, 6% at R1, and helps regenerate energy whenever you use an elemental skill. It'll drain 3 energy when you use your elemental skill, but you'll regenerate 9 back after 6 seconds at R1. This is a net energy regeneration of 6 at R1 and 12 at R5. And so what this means is that it's not going to be the best fit weapon for the likes of Zhongli and Zhao because they don't really need the elemental mastery subset from this weapon. So the 2 characters that gets the best benefit out of this weapon is Xiangling and Hu Tao. It could work for Rosaria if you want to delegate her to a position that can take advantage of the elemental mastery, maybe in some sort of reverse melt comp, but otherwise I think that Rosaria has better options. The main competitors for this weapon are the prototype Star Glitter and the Favonius Lance, and those weapons are going to give you a lot more energy regeneration, but a lot less damage. Here is a chart of vaporized damage for Xiangling with various types of builds with the Dragon's Bane, Kitain Cross Spear, and the prototype Star Glitter. It's a mix of using attack percent and energy recharge on the build. It's very clear that if you run attack percent on the Dragon's Bane or the Kitain Cross Spear, it's definitely going to outdamage the Star Glitter, but if you're going to be using the new Inazuma weapon on Xiangling, you definitely need to build some energy recharge because Xiangling's elemental burst is very powerful. So we'll be comparing the Dragon's Bane and Kitain Cross Spear with energy recharge in its build and the Star Glitter with attack percent on its build, so that way their energy recharge is as similar as it could be. And so you can see with this visualization that the Dragon's Bane is the clear winner here. However, you must be able to capitalize on that damage bonus, so you need a team comp that consistently applies Hydro or Pyro onto the enemy. The Kitain Cross Spear looks like it's the worst weapon here, but since the damage difference between the Kitain Cross Spear and all of these weapons is very, very small, if you value that 6 flat net energy generation, then it's going to be better for you. The prototype Star Glitter is just kind of there, it doesn't provide any other kind of bonuses, and its energy regeneration is actually about 10% lower than the other two builds. So for a sub DPS Xiangling, the Dragon's Bane will deal more damage if you can capitalize on the damage bonus. The Kitain Cross Spear's damage will be ever so slightly lower than both, but provide a little bit extra energy, and the prototype Star Glitter does just a tad bit more damage than the Kitain Cross Spear, but provides no other kinds of bonuses. The next weapon on my list is the bow. This bow is pretty much good for any main DPS bow character as long as you don't want to use their elemental burst, or if you want to hold on to your burst while you deal normal or charge attack damage. So the weapon is a low base attack weapon at 454, but provides you a large attack percent bonus, 55.1%. It increases your normal attack damage by 12% and your charge attack damage by 16%, and this effect doubles if your elemental burst is full. So for the likes of sub DPS or support characters, I'm going to ignore it. This means characters like Venti, Yona, or a support or sub DPS official. So this means characters like Amber, Child, Ganyu, and Yoimiya really like this bow as a free-to-play option. Your real competitor is the Prototype Crescent, but the Prototype Crescent has a lot of caveats. Prototype Crescent gives you a shit ton of attack percent boost, but it depends on whether or not you can hit those weak points. So this might not be for everyone. I know that people on mobile have a really hard time aiming, so I can understand why you wouldn't like the Prototype Crescent. Some enemies also don't even have weak spots, so you can't proc this weapon's ability. The only downside to this weapon is that in order to maximize its effects, you have to not use your elemental burst or hold onto it for longer than you would like. And elemental bursts are very powerful, so if you are just not using it, you're losing out on a lot of damage. So I'm going to take Child as an example. His rotation usually starts with his ranged elemental burst in an attempt to vaporize it and deal a lot of damage. This means you no longer have the bonus from the bow's effect. The alternative is to hold on to your elemental burst, but then you miss out on that huge vaporize damage. So what this means is that this kind of depends on what kind of team comp you're running. Maybe if you're running an electro charged comp, this can be much better for him. And obviously if you don't have the rust, then this is a very good option to replace that. This applies the same thing to Ganyu. Her elemental burst can sometimes be a little bit random, but it does provide her with an extra 20% cryo damage bonus if you are using your attacks while you are standing inside of the circle. So personally at R1, I don't see the benefit of holding onto your burst. At R1, you get an extra 12% charge attack bonus, and if you hold onto your burst, it'll become 24%. So this is only a 4% damage bonus on your charge attacks versus 20% cryo damage bonus, falling icicle damage, and a 20% cryo damage bonus to your elemental skill. 4% doesn't seem so good with all of that considered. At R5, it does go up to 48%, so it's now a 28% damage bonus to your charge attacks, but this is very expensive and hugely based on luck getting enough bow billets. And really for Yoimiya, it's the same issue, but there are situations where it might actually benefit Yoimiya more than the other characters. And that situation is if you happen to switch into Yoimiya and her elemental burst is already full, because typically you don't want to pop your burst before you pop your elemental skill as Yoimiya. You want to be able to get your stacks and provide that attack bonus to your teammates before popping your elemental burst. So in those situations where when you switch into Yoimiya and you have a full elemental burst and are ready to use your elemental skill, then Yoimiya gets the full benefits of this weapon's effect. But that's not a situation that you can always control, so that's why I think that this bow is not as good as the other weapons, especially the sword and the spear. On paper though, this weapon does do a lot of damage, and here are the comparisons with it. In this first chart, it's a little bit difficult to see, but the Prototype Crescent, when it has its buff, is the most damaging weapon. Even when the Hamayumi has its buff, it still doesn't quite match up to the damage output of the Prototype Crescent with its buff. Prototype Crescent without its buff is actually doing very similar damage to the Hamayumi with its buff. In this chart, it's a little bit easier to see. When it comes to charge attack damage, the buffed Prototype Crescent does the most damage. And then after that, it's the Hamayumi with the buff, but it's closely followed by the Prototype Crescent without its buff. And then we of course cannot ignore elemental burst damage. And when it comes to the Hamayumi with the buff, the green bar should actually be 0 because you're holding onto your burst in order to get that damage bonus. So what this means is that the Prototype Crescent is actually going to outdamage it because you're going to be having your elemental burst doing damage as well while you are doing charge attack damage. This doesn't include higher refinements for the Hamayumi, so I'm not entirely sure how much better that's going to do, so use your prototypes or billets at your own discretion. But if I were to take a guess, if you were to similarly refine the prototype Crescent, the results would still be similar that we're seeing here. However, the prototype Crescent, when you refine it, you won't get any benefits from the refinement unless you're able to hit weak points. So that is a major point to consider when refining the prototype Crescent versus the Hamayumi. Next up is the Claymore, and this one has a 510 base attack as well as 45.9% extra energy recharge, and its ability is very much similar to the spear in that it increases your elemental skill damage by a little bit and helps you regenerate energy. This weapon is definitely designed to be used on your support or burst DPS characters and goes especially well if you're using the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate set. And so with that said, I wouldn't use this for carries like Diluc, Eula, or Razor. To be honest, actually I'm not 100% on Razor because I don't really play him or know enough about that guy, so apologies. But I think that Razor probably benefits more from a physical damage Claymore, or just pure attack, because a lot of his kit regenerates energy for him already. So this leaves characters like Beidou, Chongyun, Noelle, Xinyan, and Sayu. And for a burst support Beidou, this is very strong, especially paired with the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. For Chongyun, it's probably not as good because his burst is already on a pretty low cooldown, so he really doesn't need that much energy recharge. And for Noelle, her best free-to-play option is going to be the White Blind because it helps boost her defense, which in turn helps boost her damage output. And generally for Noelle, you don't want to build energy recharge directly on her, you want to build a team that is able to battery for her. With this chart, we're showing the damage output for Beidou, and the Inazuma Claymore with attack percent as its sans piece does the second highest damage output out of all of the available combinations you can run for a sub DPS Beidou. So this weapon is providing pretty good damage output as well as pretty decent energy recharge. Its energy recharge is better than the Sacrificial Greatsword with attack percent, but it's lower than the other combinations of weapons. But that lower energy recharge is slightly offset by that net 6 energy regain whenever you use an elemental skill that hits an opponent. But for Beidou specifically, you'll want to be a little bit careful how you use this since it's got a 10-second cooldown, but her elemental skill is on a 7.5-second cooldown. So in order to trigger the passive on this weapon as much as possible, you'll want to wait those extra 2.5 seconds before using your E skill the second time around. So use this chart and graph to determine which kind of playstyle you would prefer, and for me personally, I would go for the prototype Archaic with energy recharge or the Favonius Sword with attack percent because I don't want to manage that cooldown with the Inazuma Claymore. That's just my preference, and everyone's gonna have their own preference. I don't mind that slight damage loss. And now lastly on my list is the Catalyst. And before I say anything about this weapon, I just want to say that I don't think this weapon is as bad as a lot of people think, and it's not as restrictive as a lot of people think. This weapon is a 565 base attack weapon with 30.6 extra energy recharge. Triggering an electro-related reaction will increase the damage bonus for characters that are involved in that elemental reaction. So from this weapon's description, it makes it seem like only Electro Catalyst users can really use this, but that's not entirely true. As long as you can reliably create electro-related reactions, you're good. You can use Beidou to apply electro, and then use a character like Sucrose or Ningguang to create swirl or crystallize reactions that involve electro. If you do this, you get a damage bonus to both Anemo, Geo, and Electro. So this weapon is actually one of the very few ways you can get elemental damage bonus for Geo and Anemo as well. So although there are ways for non-electro characters to use it, I still don't think it's that great of a weapon. I just wanted to demonstrate that it is possible for other characters besides Electro ones can actually use this weapon. 10% damage bonus at R1 isn't that great, and it only lasts 6 seconds, and all the way up to 20% at R5, which is very hard to get and very expensive. For reference, the Thrilling Tales 3-star weapon gives you 48% extra attack bonus, which is very easy to get at R5. However, Thrilling Tales does require proper rotation, but the ring gives the damage bonus without the need to properly rotate. All characters involved in the reaction with a relevant element will get the bonus. The Thrilling Tales also cannot maintain 100% uptime, but theoretically the Hakushin Ring can. What this does mean, however, is that giving this weapon to an Electro Catalyst user allows you to give the damage bonuses to every element, or every element that's on your team, whereas using it with a non-Electro character limits who can get the bonus. You can only get it with Electro and the element of the character that's wielding it. But if you build your team around that specific element like Anemo or Geo, then it makes it a non-concern. So yeah, I would pretty much ignore this weapon, but if you were to use it, it can work on characters like Lisa, Ningguang, and Sucrose. Other characters, I don't think it's going to be really benefiting you too much. Mona might have a case, but for the most part, I don't think she's used in electro-charged reaction comps, so you can probably just scratch that. She really does like that extra energy recharge, and the high base attack is really nice. And if you do happen to use her in electro-charged comp, she can provide both hydro and electro damage bonus. But like I just said, I don't think she's really used for that type of team comp. But if you want to be brave and bold and try out a team comp like that, then by all means, give it a try. Maybe some kind of electro-charged child team comp. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing out ideas here and possibilities. And this weapon's closest competitors are the Favonius Codex and the Wine and Song. I don't really have any math here because I think that the Favonius Codex and the Wine and Song are just straight up better weapons. If you really need to build energy recharge on a Catalyst character, then these two weapons are definitely your go-to. And well, does anyone actually own the Wine and Song? I don't even know if I should have mentioned it. Oh well, whatever. So to wrap everything up, I think that the sword is the best weapon here, but it's going to depend on which units you use in your account. If you have a Jean or an Ayaka, arguably a Kazuha or a Kaya as well, this is going to be really good for them. The spear is really only good for Xiangling and Hu Tao, but it's pretty much on the same level or a little bit worse than the Dragon's Bane. So if you have the Dragon's Bane already, and if you have that refined, then that's probably going to be your go-to. As it stands right now, there isn't really any other character in the game that doesn't take advantage of the passive skill from the Dragon's Bane. So really, I think the Dragon's Bane is just going to be better than the Kitain Cross Spear. And for the bow, at least in Ganyu's case, it really isn't that much better than the Prototype Crescent, because even without its buff, you're going to be dealing more damage because you actually get to use your Elemental Burst. And for the Claymore, you have lots of different combinations you can use, and they are all pretty much the same, so I don't really see a good reason to use your billets on this weapon. I would much rather refine my White Blind for a Noelle build or a Shinyan build. And then lastly, the Catalyst, well, I don't really have much to say about this one. It just doesn't really have a place right now, so I wouldn't spend my prototypes on this weapon. I hope this helped you out, and this has been completely my own opinion with some math sprinkled in to support my thoughts. Let me know what your thoughts are, and if I missed anything or got something wrong, leave it down in the comments. If you guys enjoyed this, then leave a like, and if you really liked it, then consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, I will see you guys later.